Okay, Mary, you want to?
Hi, everybody. We're glad you're here. It's nice to see that we truly do have a very global community. So it's great to appreciate have you all here. We have a group of dedicated new Agilists, experienced Agilists, passionate business and technical leaders who collaborate and learn and share knowledge about being Agile. And we're all welcome here, no matter your background. And we're all really glad that you're here today and so happy to have our I'm James here with us today. So we're really looking forward to this presentation. Thank you very much. Good to see you too, Rob.
James, welcome. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us. I know it's dinner time or past dinner time. Hopefully you have some energy after dinner for this. For people who don't know James, I got introduced to James when he was presenting about the product operating model in one of the webinars, and it's quite fascinating. He has worked for many years, many years as a product leader, leader of product leaders, and a product coach. And especially he spent quite a bit of time at Amazon. And, we all want to know the secret sauce that Amazon has so that we can translate and do what we are doing a little bit better. I don't want to get into a lot of details about James' background. He's going to go into it. So thank you, James, and all yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. Today, I'm going to give you a peek behind the curtain of just some of the different product operating models that exist within Amazon. And I'll talk a bit more about my journey there. But Amazon is highly regarded in the world of both tech and product management. And so my hope is that after today, you'll have a bit of a better understanding of what goes into their success. But I might also break down a few myths that maybe you've encountered. But before I go into all that, I just want to introduce myself to you all. So as you heard, my name is James Gunaca, and I'm a product management career coach now. And what that means is I help product people achieve career outcomes that matter to them. But my career has spanned a lot of different parts of the world, a lot of different parts of product and technology. And so over the last 20 plus years, I've worked with big tech companies on their marketing campaigns like Hewlett Packard at the start of my career back in the Bay Area. I did market research for Kodak and Nokia just outside of university. And then I worked at different agencies in the Bay Area before relocating to Seattle when I wanted to transition into product management. It was at that time that I joined Amazon working on a then beta product called Amazon Echo with the Alexa AI assistant, which I worked on for the next 5 or so years into many generations of that product development before transitioning to another role at Amazon, but then also leaving the United States and moving to Luxembourg, where Amazon's EU headquarters is located. There, I started working on Amazon's consumer retail organization, specifically focused on how we would launch digital services, digital software, and video games on the retail website. I did that for a few more years at Amazon before making my third and final rotation to a part of the company called a People Experience Technology, which is a long way of saying HR tech, building products internally that were being used by employees at the company. So along that journey at Amazon, I also started doing coaching. I was invited to go through a career coaching program as a leader of product teams, and found that that was something that really spoke to me and continued to do that in my career. I left Amazon at the end of 2022, early 2023. That's when I came to London, where I was leading a product team at a company called ExpressVPN. Now, what I've been doing for the past couple of years is, again, working with people and teams on how to basically apply all the things that I know and have seen work and be successful in achieving product outcomes and career outcomes that matter. I also write for Mind the Product. It's a trade publication based out of here in the UK, but they've got events and publications that reach all different corners of the world. I'm also an organizer for a meetup called Product Tank. So it's an in-person meetup, but there's actually over 200 different chapters around the world. Throughout my career, I've been able to serve over 500 million customers. So that's a bit more about me. That code goes to my website where you can learn more about me, my work, also subscribe to a free newsletter that I send out to over 1,000 product managers every week. These include insights, stories, advice on navigating a career in product management. So welcome you all to subscribe. I'll also drop a link in the chat to that as well. But that is a bit about me. Today, we're here to talk about Amazon, right? And the product operating model at Amazon. So in addition to what I'll share about them, there's a single key takeaway that's more important than anything that I'm going to share with you. And that's really that there is no such thing as a perfect product operating model. Amazon really isn't the only successful company out there, right? What worked for them isn't a recipe for repeated success, despite maybe what you have read or seen when people either write books or write articles or just talk about Amazon in general, right? And I know this because there is not a single product operating model that's used at Amazon. I'm going to go through some of those with you today. But let me just zoom out a bit and let's talk a little bit about Amazon and the histories of some of the great successes that they've had, some of which I was fortunate enough to play a part in, others I got to observe. So starting with Prime, right? So Prime membership, you're probably all very familiar with it. I actually had the fortune of being there for the very first Prime Day as well, which was a combination of bringing a new benefit to Prime members, but also a time where we were seeing that Amazon Echo was actually going to be a product that would take off. But the Prime membership is actually something that was written about by Marty Kagan when describing the product operating model, and actually served as a bit of inspiration for me to produce this talk. Because what I felt the takeaway was from that conversation was, hey, here's a product operating model that works at Amazon, go replicate it in other places. But the truth is, what was done that made Prime a success wasn't the same in terms of other businesses that Amazon ran. So another example is AWS. Okay, so again, you're familiar with AWS. It's the backbone of lots of different internet service providers. Other technology companies run on AWS, and it's become a $10 billion plus business for them. And it's where most of their growth and success could be attributed to over the past decade plus. Right? But the way AWS came to be a success wasn't even about building something new for customers. It was about building things internally for the company to scale as they were growing. And then they landed on this insight, oh, this is something we could probably sell to the market. And then third, Echo. This was Amazon creating an entirely new consumer electronics device category. There was no such thing as a voice-controlled speaker until 2015, when Amazon introduced and launched Amazon Echo with their Alexa voice assistant. And up until this point, really the only AI that was available at scale was the Siri voice assistant. And it was limited only to people who had iPhones, right? And if I'm real, that was 10 years ago. Siri is not doing a whole lot more now than it was back then. So even the innovation that had propelled Siri to its success at that point in time really didn't kind of carry on. But this idea of ambient computing in the home, where you could have a device that you could just talk to and have what felt like a conversation at the time, but compared to what we have now, it's very different, was quite revolutionary. And it was the center focal point for Amazon for years. An example you can go back to understand this is by looking at the Amazon shareholder letters from 2016 to about 2018 or 2019. Echo and actually Alexa became a focal point for the company's innovation. So these three examples I wanted to just highlight as successes for the company. Prime, still a core part of the business, drives over 100 million subscriptions. AWS, I mentioned 10 billion in annual revenue for the business. Amazon Echo, something that got into over 500 million households, nearly 1 billion devices sold that use Alexa. Very successful business models, but all approached and became successes in different ways. At the same time, Amazon's had some not so great successes. So Amazon Echo actually launched on the heels of perhaps Amazon's biggest and most public failure of all, which was the Fire Phone. In fact, it was much of the team that was working on Fire Phone that was reallocated over to Amazon Echo because that device went end of life within the first 12 months of it launching. And there was a high expectation that Echo could very much be the next big flop, right? This idea of putting a microphone with a speaker in your house that's always listening, while it had a promise of a Star Trek computer-like experience, there was still something that customers just needed to get comfortable with, and it wasn't clear if that was actually going to work. So the Fire Phone, I'm not here to talk about what happened there, but it's just one example of things not working. But here's another. Maybe you don't know this, right? But if you lived in Seattle or maybe San Francisco, you probably knew that at one point in time, Amazon was competing with the Uber Eats and the Just Eats, and I'm trying to think of like others that I think Grubhub is another US one. So forgive me, I've got most of the European ones that I've experienced with, but Amazon launched Amazon Restaurants, and it lasted for a couple of years. You know, they had the distribution right, but they were breaking into a new category, and this business flopped. And then finally, there was this idea of Prime drones, right? Prime robots, put a little package in it and it knows where to go and it drives around. Huge investment put into this technology. They had all the investment they had done to get robots working inside fulfillment centers. They purchased iRobot. They purchased Ring cameras. They invested all this money in vision tech, but this never really took off either. These little Prime robots that could go do delivery. And Prime Air, in terms of the drone delivery service, that's been something that's been in the works for nearly a decade, but we actually haven't seen it executed at scale, and we haven't seen it become a natural part of the delivery experience. So that just kind of summarizes that as a company, they've got a lot of great successes, but there are also a lot of failures. And that's not to say that those failures are a result of anything those teams did incorrectly, but it's actually, I think, what fuels some of the innovation, or at least fueled innovation at Amazon during the time I worked there, was this belief that you're going to have a lot of failures on the path to success. But just because an operating model that's used for one product doesn't mean that if you apply it to another, that you can expect similar results. Okay. Next, I want to talk about how Amazon is kind of regarded for their ways of working. This is kind of where I want to have a little bit of fun, breaking down some myths and then sharing the facts. And this is coming from experience. Again, I've worked there for nearly a decade. I worked in 3 different orgs under 3 different SVPs, right? And sat in meetings of all different kinds. And so number one myth I always hear is no PowerPoints, right? Slides are banned at Amazon. This is just blatantly false. Sure, no PowerPoint for critical decision making, but still some PowerPoints. I delivered quite a few while I was there. Mostly these were used for things like, large meetings where you're trying to just communicate a message to someone and maybe rally the teams together. So think all hands type meetings, right? These are all typically run over PowerPoint. They also run internal conferences. In fact, one of the ones I went to is called ProdCon, or Product Conference. It's basically an internal conference for the thousands of product managers that exist at the company to collaborate with each other. It's very much driven by slides. But do you take a deck to Jeff or to some other SVP to drive a critical decision? No, that's certainly documents. Here's another one. No dates. So that article I mentioned earlier about Amazon's product operating model emphasized how there wasn't a lot of importance placed on timelines or dates. And if you read any of the books from Marty Kagan and others, like Inspired, Transformed, right, or Escaping the Build Trap by Melissa Perry, there's this emphasis on not trying to put strict timelines on work that's being done, right? Because the outcome matters more than the date. But the reality is, there's plenty of dates all the time, everywhere. My SVP, Dave Limp, while I was there, we would have a global business review every Friday. We're talking 200 people in a room, maybe 100 more on a call, and reviewing a document with a bunch of actions and insights. And the first 2 or 3 pages was called Lighthouse Bullet Points, right? And these would essentially include an outcome, an action, and a date. And if there wasn't a date, there needed to be a date for a date. There always needed to be like use of timelines to drive accountability. And so even when like you're trying to work towards achieving some product outcomes, very much there are still dates as part of what is being done. Roadmaps have dates, deliverables have dates, action items have dates, goals have dates. And so you can aspire towards wanting to not be held to strict timelines, but when you have things that you're going to launch and you're trying to orchestrate lots of things happening around a certain time period, like you're going to need dates for that. Another common one, the customer always comes first, right? One of Amazon's leadership principles is customer obsession. And this resonated deeply with me because I definitely feel like the customer is someone that if they're not pleased, if they're not having a good experience, like they're going to do their business somewhere else. But internally, like how is this positioned, right? Well, if you achieve business outcomes, the ones that matter will be achieved by obsessing over the customer, right? So this was something I had to kind of acclimate to. I read about customer obsession, about their leadership principles. I prepared stories to demonstrate that I was a customer obsessed person. And so when I got inside the company, I was like, oh, okay, I can really lean in on what the right thing is to do for the customer. And that will supersede some of the maybe business challenges that I had faced in companies I'd worked at in the past. Example I like to give, I talked earlier about the Amazon Echo and this idea of putting a device with a microphone that's always listening in the home. And that being something that a lot of customers rightfully were concerned about. Something that wasn't made clear to customers was the mute button on the device was actually hardwired. It was a physical kill switch. When you press that button, it cut the circuit to the microphone. So it actually wasn't physically possible for it to record anything when that button was pressed. And I felt that it was really important to tell customers that on the product detail page and the product setup guide so that they could understand, hey, this was designed with your privacy in mind. And although that was the customer obsessed thing to do, the concern from a business outcome standpoint was if we draw too much attention to privacy, people like we may be introducing that idea in the heads of customers who wouldn't have thought of it otherwise. And this was true, that was like the plan for the first 3 or 4 years of Echo and Alexa. It wasn't until you started seeing the press talk about privacy, you started seeing Google Home and Apple HomePod, it becoming a very competitive space. And then privacy became a means of competition. And again, it was the business outcome that drove then talking about and even introducing new privacy features for customers. Another one, every product starts with what's called a PR FAQ or a 6-pager. So if you don't know what a PR FAQ is at Amazon, PR FAQ stands for press release and frequently asked questions. It's a common document format that's been used at the company for a long time, where the first page just ends up being a press release that's written as if it takes place on the day your product or your innovation is announced to the public. And it's written in a way that, you would go in a real press release. The FAQs, the next 5 pages, address either customer-facing questions or internal-facing questions that support bringing that vision to life. And so the perception I've encountered is, oh, you must have written a ton of PR FAQs and you have to write one for every single new thing you're going to build. And you could imagine okay, when does it not make sense to write a 6-page document if all we're doing is, changing a button for a part of an experience? Now, changing something like the buy button, right, across hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pages, maybe that one had a PR FAQ. but like changing the button in an app of the Alexa app, like not something we need a peer FAQ for. So the reality is like they're used a lot, but mostly on bigger bets. So think about things that are going to require some type of an investment decision. You need to build a business case, right? One of the largest peer FAQs I wrote when I was there was during my time on the digital software and video games business, where I was advocating for an investment of a couple of $1 million to go capitalize on a $3 billion plus gross revenue opportunity worldwide for combining digital software purchases with physical hardware. So think being able to buy a Peloton bike and a Peloton subscription at the same time through Amazon, whereas before that wasn't something that was able to be done on the marketplace or anywhere when it came to e-commerce marketplaces. So that made sense to do that peer FAQ. Had a product vision to convey, had a business case to substantiate, but not every feature or everything that we did needed to have that 6-page document. Let's go through some others here. Roadmaps, right? Something every product person, whether you're involved in managing it or you're involved with delivering it, right? You're familiar with roadmaps. So belief here is that, oh, well, with such a document heavy culture, roadmaps are always formatted in documents. Well, here's the truth, right? Some roadmaps, yes, they're in documents, but some people just manage them in Excel. Some will use proprietary tools. Like some teams will go off and somehow magically get funding to go use an external tool like a Monday.com or maybe even ProdPad could be used at some teams today. Right, or they'll build things internally at the company to manage things like their roadmaps. And so teams are kind of given a little bit of liberty to operate how they want. But when it comes to investing in third-party tools, bar's a little bit higher to clear. There's obviously security and safety constraints to keep in mind. Certainly, there's a lot of protection towards customer data and keeping things confidential inside the company, right? So third-party tools, probably the least common, but there's no consistency. I worked on, like I said, 3 different orgs within the company, but even within those orgs, I would work under different managers. I'd work on with different tech teams. I'd collaborate with different tech teams across different parts of the company, including AWS and others. And every time you would kind of ask what someone's roadmap looked like, it would be something different because there wasn't like a template or something that teams would use consistently. This had its pros and cons, right? On the one hand, you're free to kind of build a mechanism that works for you. On the other hand, it's anytime you have to coordinate amongst teams, right? You're having to acclimate to how they pull in the information about what's being worked on, when and why, and what kind of impact it's going to drive. Next, this one I was a little guilty of myself when I first joined. But I can still kind of come up against this. Like, oh, you worked at Amazon. You must have just had unlimited resources. It's such a massive company. It's got so much money. You just must just like open up a spigot and just resources just fall out. Absolutely not. Like teams are tightly constrained. Definitely more so over the past 2 to 3 years than during the time that I was there. I think when I joined Amazon, there was about 30,000 corporate employees. By the time I left, it was around 300,000, but the global workforce, including fulfillment center and associates, was over 1.2 million. Big company. But when it came to the teams that were working on specific problems or outcomes, hey, there's budgeting, there's resource allocations. If you need more headcount, you have to build a case for that. This idea of 2 pizza teams, maybe you've heard of this, right? It's how do you maybe assemble a team that can be fed by 2 pizzas, and that is the team you have to work with to get things done. And if you can't get it done with those people, then something either doesn't get done, right? Or you have to make do with some other changes or rely on someone else to get the work done for you. So they're tightly constrained in terms of their resourcing. Right? There was a time when, as the product manager, I was also doing product management, project management. You could say some of the product owner ceremonies, Scrum Master, right? It's like me, an engineering manager, the actual devs, maybe a design resource that is just partially giving me some of their time. I see a comment in the chat from Amanda, New York sized pizzas, sometimes. But generally like the kind that you could order from, you know, Domino's. I don't know how big they make them in New York, right? But teams tightly constrained, not something where they just throw a bunch of resources at something because they feel like it's worth it. Okay. Another one, and this may be one of the last ones. I think I've got one more after this. This idea that Amazon has access to the best tools. Another one I was guilty of, right? You think world-leading tech company builds tech products. Those tech products are highly regarded. They must have things internally that are amazing. Not so true. Many of the tools are proprietary, often inadequate, and in some cases, bizarrely like behind. This was one of the hardest things for me to come to grips with for the first 5 or so years that I worked there. When I joined in 2015, like this was still a time when Google Workspace and what was I think formerly called G Suite would enable you to, you know, collaborate on a spreadsheet, collaborate in Word documents, collaborate on slides in real time, and have like commenting exchanges back and forth with each other. Instead, across Amazon at the time, we had SharePoint 2013, which did not enable co-authoring on anything, I think, except for Word documents. And even that constantly was, hey, can you get out of the document? The document's locked. Can you unlock the document? It was just total pain in the butt. I can't imagine what the productivity losses were as a result. We finally got things like Slack in 2021 or 2022. Up until that point, they had built their own proprietary chat software called Amazon Chime, which secured chat, but just could not keep up with the pace of innovation and the types of experience and productivity gains you could get from a company exclusively focused on things like Salesforce was with Slack. So this was a trend. It did start to tip the scales towards applying product mentalities product thinking to their internal products in the last few years I was there. In fact, the product that I last worked on was designed and built with the goal of we need to be building a product that's at the same level we'd ship to end customers. Because up until that point, only ship the bare minimum for internal employees, because that is frugality at work. It's that constraint there. And finally, Amazon only hires the best. The truth, they try to hire the best, hire and develop the best, right? So it's not only the best of the best that work there, but they certainly strive for it. So the takeaway here is like, hey, look, they're regarded as, you know, one of the best places that create products, but they aren't always as consistent as you might think. So there's a lot to learn from them. They've done a lot of things that are really innovative, but they're challenged, just like many other companies, right? And I share this not because of the personal experiences I had and how I feel about working there, which I've, you know, written about publicly, but I share this because a lot of times people in their teams, they compare how they're operating to what their perspective is about how another company operates. And the reality is, like, we're all just always trying to figure things out and do them in an effective way, trying to get better. And sometimes the way things are being done actually doesn't play a part in it being done successfully. And sometimes you just happen to pick the right product, the right market, the right time, and maybe have the right people working on it. All right, finally, I want to talk you through these 3 product operating models. First, what do I mean by product operating model? What's involved, right? So let's think about like these 4 core components of the product management skill set or function, right? On the product development process, you've got discovery, strategy, and delivery. Then you also have cross-functional collaboration, right? This is inherently people skills, working with other teams. So I just want to give a little bit more insight into what these models were like in the 3 different parts of the company that I worked at, starting with Amazon Echo. So how did we conduct discovery, strategy, and delivery when working on that product? A lot of the customer discovery before we launched it to the public, we didn't talk to end customers about it. It was an idea internally, and that got greenlit because at the time, Amazon was really gung-ho about investing in new things, not knowing whether or not they would pay off. Running lots of experiments, right? Hoping that at least 1 out of 10 or maybe 1 out of 100 would pay off at 100x. And so the vision was internal. We would validate ideas and experiences by running internal customer betas, right? And then when things would meet a certain threshold for internal customer satisfaction, like it would get pushed to production and then included in the end result of the experience. From a strategy standpoint, these were typically written for a product for its lifespan. So Amazon Echo V1 had a product strategy. And then the next big strategy was, how do we launch the smaller version of this in the Echo Dot? And then how do we decide when we go to different versions of this product with a screen? And basically the success of one product would determine how much we would invest in the subsequent product. When it came to specific features, right? When it came to delivery of those features, it would pass that internal customer satisfaction, then it would be launched. It would be delivered to customers. And I'd write an email that would be sent to customers on Friday that said, hey, here's this new thing you can do with Alexa now on your Echo. Because when you sell a device that you can only talk to without a screen, how else are you supposed to tell customers how to use it? Right? They're not going back to Amazon.com to learn how to use their device. We have to find other ways to communicate with them. And then our roadmaps, like these would vary from team to team because, right, it's not just one team working on all these features. You got a team working on music features, a team working on smart home features, a team working on, kitchen timers and alarms, et cetera. So they're all kind of like managing their own roadmaps individually. The hardware roadmap, though, is something that would get set for years in advance and be revisited once a year or twice a year during Amazon's what is called OP1 and OP2 planning, or operating 1 and operating 2. Right? So that's a little bit about Echo. Next was video games and software. Right? So when I switched to this org at the end of 2019, early 2020, much smaller organization, right? Devices, 10,000 people. About 1 to 2,000 worked on Amazon Echo and Alexa when I left. Video games and software, we're talking a couple of hundred people in this entire organization. Engineering team of about 60, 4 PMs, including myself. And what discovery processes were they using? It was pretty much, what's the sales team telling us that the partners, the vendors wanted? What did Nintendo want? What did Adobe want? What did Microsoft want on our marketplace so that they would continue to sell their products in the way they wanted to sell? That was kind of our discovery and our intake. If people had ideas within the team or the org, they'd submit them through an intake. But there wasn't like this process of me and the other PMs sitting down with customers shopping on Amazon.com and thinking like, what is it they're telling us they want us to build? We would sometimes look into what problems are kind of recurring with customer service, right? But we wouldn't always be sitting on those customer service calls. So that's a bit about the discovery process. On the strategy side, when I started, I sat in this meeting with then director of the business, my senior manager of product management, my fellow PMs, a TPM, which we had, and then our head of engineering. And there were these massive printouts of Excel spreadsheets that were so tiny, I couldn't actually read it on the printout. I had to look on a computer. And there's 2 versions of spreadsheet. One's like the roadmap with a Gantt chart, and one's like status information on all those roadmap items. And people were supposed to figure out when they're looking at one, but they're finding the list of it on the others with details. And it was just I felt it was a disaster. I thought we were going to get reamed for having the printouts come to the meeting 10 minutes late and information being mismatched between these 2 documents. But my director politely just suggested, hey, look, I'm going to be leaving and there's going to be a new director coming in soon. So I really encourage you to revisit how you do this before this new person comes in. That was probably the politest way of saying this is a shit show that I experienced the entire time that I was there. But we revisited and rebuilt entirely how we kind of built the artifacts we would use for our roadmap. The other thing that we did was change how much was on it, like go from, I think it was around 50 items down to less than 10. Get a lot more focus, a lot less things to do, a lot less things to track, make sure we focus on things that were bigger impact. When it came to delivery though, ship something, measure it on launch day, move on to the next thing. And then finally, Amazon experience and technology. Right, so the last product that I built at Amazon was an internal search engine that was used by those 1.some million employees to find information about managing their work life. And I luckily had the freedom to approach it as we would an end consumer product experience, right? So it was this really clunky, terrible experience, but really got to leverage the core parts of product management, doing customer discovery, right? Sitting down with real customers, which were just my coworkers, right? And I use coworkers like broadly. Like I would talk with people different parts of the world, different parts of the company, people with different needs, including those with accessibility needs. Because at a workforce size that large, you pretty much have a wide range of customer needs. You can meet with anyone who has, whether they need to use accessibility tools or they have vision and hearing challenges, and they're needing to use a search product. Right. So that was a core part of customer discovery, sitting with end customers. Strategy is a 1-year deal. I wrote the strategy one time, didn't have to kind of revisit it regularly. And then delivery, we dial up our features, we evaluate how they're changing the experience, and then we iterate together. So that was something as well that operated quite differently than 2 of the other experiences I'd had up until that point. Ceremonies, they're quite consistent, right? You have your typical sprint planning sessions. Some teams do retrospectives, some didn't, right? Those types of ceremonies were there, but how we arrived at what things to build and why, how we communicated the plans and changes amongst our team, right? These were all quite different. So I want to bring you back to there was no such thing as a perfect product operating model. Echo had success. The digital software and video games business was successful. The search product I rebuilt was successful for what it was intended to do, right? But these were all done in very different ways. But I do want to leave you with a couple of things that I do think work consistently, regardless of where you work, regardless of your team structure. Number 1, I strongly believe that strong document writing leads to sharpened thinking. So if you're working in a place where PowerPoints are how strategic decisions are discussed and conveyed, I would encourage you to just experiment with trying document writing. It really forces you to articulate the rationale behind decisions and get people to have a better shared understanding, right? When you just share slides, great for giving a talk, right? But if you're trying to bring someone to the same place you are about all the information that you know, don't leave it up to just how well you communicate and how well you can command people's attention for 45 minutes. Write it down. Have everyone read it, right? And even the work to create that document will sharpen your thinking. Number 2, business value over customer value. Businesses exist to make money, save money, bring in new customers, keep existing customers, increase shareholder value. So as long as you're driving some of that kind of value there, let that be the fuel to deliver more customer value. But it needs to be both. It needs to be both customer value and business value for products to be successful. And then third, I think clear ownership will drive better outcomes. So one of the big challenges I think a lot of teams face is ambiguity when it comes to ownership. Who's responsible for what? And so I hope that from this little talk today, you've learned a bit more about what it was like on the inside, and hopefully walk away with some thoughts about how you can apply changes in the way product's done at your company. That's it for me. Thank you so much. We'll be happy to take some of your questions. Also, feedback is welcomed. Super important to me. This will just take you to my website, little feedback form. But I think we've got just about 15 minutes now. So would love to answer any questions you have. I'm quite an open book, so feel free to pop them in the chat, or I'll turn it back over to Ron and Gopal and the team to facilitate the Q&A. Thank you.
So Mark,
Uh,
the recording is in our YouTube channel. I'll post a link here.
And we've got a question in the chat. Can you suggest some tactics or tips on how to navigate into a strong writing culture where it doesn't exist? That's a good one.
Yes. Yes. So anytime you're changing ways of working, one of the first things I typically suggest is framing any new change you want to try or implement as an experiment. So you kind of take people's concerns or maybe aversion to changing ways of working by saying, hey, let's just try this and see how it goes, rather than this is why I think we should start writing instead of doing slides or something else, because either someone else does it or because I read this newsletter or because I went to this webinar, right? That kind of can put people on the defensive, like, oh, well, the way that we do it now works. Why should we change it? Instead, it's, hey, here's something I think we can experiment with. Here's maybe how we want to evaluate whether or not it's helping us. And so framing it as an experiment, maybe even be clear about what improvement you think it is going to drive, and validating if that's actually an outcome people care about. So if you reflect on, a certain type of standing meeting that you have, whether it's a roadmap meeting or maybe it's like a monthly business review, and you're finding repeating occurrences of problems, like, hey, every time we come to this meeting, people are just kind of, I'll actually draw from a specific example. When I joined ExpressVPN, I joined this weekly tribe leadership team on Wednesdays. And this was with the co-founder, my CPO, our CTO, the head of marketing. So all these different tribe leaders and heads of, and one of the co-founders. And I would walk into this meeting and there's this Google Doc that's supposed to be filled out, but all it is just bullet points of information. And I would join this meeting and people are just starting they're filling in their bullet points while waiting for other people to join. And then they're just haphazardly moving between bullet points and discussions. And there's no clear actions that are coming out of it. And I just kind of observed to start. But then I sat down with my CPO after and I said, hey, help me understand, has this meeting been run like this for a long time? Yeah, that's typically how it goes. It has been going for, as long as I've been here, which was at least for over a year at that point. I'm well, do people reflect positively on this? Because it seems like, we're not making the best use of this time, because this is a high cost meeting when you've got, leaders at that level spending an hour of their time every week. And I wanted to propose making some changes there, but I decided not to, despite seeing it as kind of low-hanging fruit. And the reason was the people who were in that meeting, they were quite happy with the way that it was running. So although I saw problems, they did not. And so you can frame things as an experiment, but you want to make sure that you validate that someone else who maybe you're going to have to get on board with this change sees some kind of value in changing or trying some new way of working. You want me to just take other questions as I see them in the chat? I just saw another one get posted.
Oh, yeah, please. And either that, or if anyone wants to just raise your hand using the raise hand feature of, because it posts you up to the top. So go ahead, James.
Great. So I'll read the question out. From my perspective, what key skills or experiences should someone highlight to make a transition from Agile product owner to Amazon PM? So I'll first preface this with Amazon has reduced, or in many cases eliminated, hiring product managers at what's called L4. So in corporate ladders, there's L4, L5, L6, L7, L8. Then it jumps to L10, L11, and I think there's only one L12, which is pretty much the CEO. But most commonly for IC product managers, there's PM1, which is L4, PM2, which is L5, senior PM, which is L6, and principal PM, which is L7. That L4, though, that PM1, pretty much doesn't exist anymore. It was originally used as kind of an entry level for a product management position. So a product owner or an agile product owner, which also, let me be clear on what I mean when I use that term, and it may be different than what's intended or what's perceived here by Majuri, I believe, in the chat. Right? Product owner typically is you don't own the roadmap. You're typically just running ceremonies and making sure that the backlog has been groomed and that engineering teams have what they need to get work done. And they're usually supporting or working with a product manager versus handling some of the product management ceremonies. So that is a common definition or way to differentiate. It might be different where you work, right? So just want to preface that because it can be quite different. So because of that, you really want to reflect on, hey, are you owning decisions about the product roadmap? Are you owning decisions or recommendations about where to make investments? Are you prioritizing what goes on to the roadmap? Are you accountable for the business value that's being driven or derived by the product changes that are running? These things probably need to be true to be considered for an Amazon PM role at this point in time. And so let's say that you have an opportunity or you have experience where you're doing those types of things, then the key skills or experiences are more around framing what you've done through the lens of Amazon's leadership principles. Like their specific hiring practices actually haven't changed much over the past 20 years with respect to how they evaluate and calibrate talent. Very much behavioral stories. And so when you're answering questions as a PM candidate, it'll be like, tell me about a time when, you had to make a difficult trade-off decision. And there your story is going to be about like, hey, I had these different things on my roadmap, or I had these two difficult stakeholders who wanted different things, or they didn't get along. And the impact of this decision was this on the product or this in terms of business value. And here are the things that I did. Right. So that is an example of the types of story preparation you would need to do and potentially the types of experience that you would need. So I hope that answers your question. Feel free to drop a follow-up in the chat.
Okay, other questions?
I just posted one more,
Yes.
but it may not be related to the topic though.
I don't mind taking it if there's nothing else. So vibe coding for PMs. What's my recommendation on this topic? I'd love to ask a follow-up question. Do you mean elaborate on what you mean with vibe coding?
No, this is specifically during the PM interviews. I've been
okay.
following I've been following this since the last few weeks or maybe about a month, that some top tier companies have now started including this as one of the elements during the interview.
Yep.
So I have strong opinions on this, but I'd like to hear what your recommendations are.
Sure. I've actually written about this. I don't think that vibe coding is actually testing for the right things for product managers. Product managers need to understand what to build and like why to build it, right? And who to build it for, not how fast can we build something. Now, I see the value in using vibe coding tools to be able to iterate more quickly and get a prototype and visualize an idea, but I don't feel like it's a skill that helps make sure you're hiring people who can make strong business decisions. Business acumen is one of the top cited skills that hiring managers of PMs say they're looking for. I ran a panel with a bunch of product leaders here in London last year. And, I polled them and asked them like, hey, what's the most important skill that you feel like your PMs need between technical acumen and like business acumen? And like overwhelmingly, it was like business acumen. Like they need to if they can't read a P&L, then like they are going to fail. Right. And so vibe coding, okay, that's great for software. Okay. You can, again, visualize something quickly. So I think spending a lot of time learning how to use those tools It may help you in preparation for companies who are experimenting with that as a means of evaluating. But as a PM, do you want to go working at a company where you're now being asked to vibe code, to still manage the roadmap, to still run the ceremonies? Like, what other tasks are they going to like add on to the PM that's going to get in the way of driving value for the business? The rumors of like Google doing this, I think, were exaggerated. There was like one Reddit post and Google came out and said, yeah, we're actually not doing, it's not a formal part of the process. It was just somewhere in India. Then I saw a single tweet from, I don't remember if it was Stripe or Shopify. There was someone else who was like, hey, and now we're getting everyone to vibe code in their interviews. But as a whole, like, and look, I talked to hundreds of different product leaders across different companies around the world. Like, this is not as big of a thing as it's being made out to be, but it certainly does sell a lot of courses. It sells a lot of licenses to tools like vibe coding tools, like getting people to use these things. But I don't know that we'll see it around in its current form for a long time. So have fun and experiment. But I work with lots of PMs to help them land their jobs, and not a single one has had to vibe code in an interview. Have they used vibe coding for like take-home task assignments? Sure, yeah. But that wasn't part of the scope, and it also wasn't something that they were asked to do in the interview.
Okay, so Amanda had her hand up, and it looks like she's posted her question in the chat. Amanda, is that your summary? So can you briefly walk us through your process of building your roadmap, who and what has input into it, and how would you typically present it for acceptance?
Right. Great question, Amanda. Thank you. A typical product management answer is it depends. And so what I would suggest, because again, I did roadmaps in different formats. I did Word docs, I did Excel, I did a tool. Now my own personal roadmap is in the now, next, later format, which is literally just a Kanban of what am I doing right now? What's the list of stuff that's going to come next? Then what am I going to do later that I know I want to do at some point, but I have no idea when? So what really matters is like, who is the audience? Like, a roadmap is just an artifact that's used to communicate what's being worked on and what are the reasons why it's being worked on and what outcomes is it supposed to drive. And the format that you build really depends on like who is going to be consuming it, right? And in one roadmap, I had a tech director who was just like, he's like, I want to see it in a Gantt. I want to see it in a Gantt chart. And I hate Gantt charts because I'm like, hey, not only are they a artifact that has to be maintained every time dates change, it's one more thing to get updated, one more artifact to get pushed, one more date that goes into an email. And it's like, how many times do I have to show a date changing for it to like not matter what the date is anymore? How it's presented for acceptance. So there's a couple of things like baked into that question. One presumes that like I'm having to get people to accept the roadmap, which again will also be circumstantial. Some roles, the PM's going to actually own the roadmap, and they're socializing it for awareness and to invite discussion, not for approval, right? Different companies will give PMs freedom to like own that decision, but that means they also own the failure if it doesn't work out or if it doesn't deliver the outcomes. And so I'll pause there. Yeah. Do you want to elaborate on the question?
Yeah, James, I was interested to hear when you do build your roadmap. So who do you get in a room? Do you get your actual people from your team? Do you get the salespeople in? What does that kind of process look like? So I'm more looking at, how do you get to your outcome? How do you decide what your outcome will be? What kind of steps you want to follow? Whose input are you taking?
Yeah, again, like it really depends on the organization and like where are you at? There is a product roadmap already and you're thinking about how you might change it? Or is it, hey, we're assembling a new team, no roadmap exists, we have to kind of start from scratch, what do we do? Like, which one of those two scenarios are you thinking?
Let's say there's nothing.
Yeah, okay.
There's the main objective that's been given to you by the company, and now you're going to build something and you haven't got a previous roadmap to reference.
Got it. Okay. Well, my first instinct will be like whatever artifact we're going to use for the roadmap is probably going to be quite lightweight because I'm assuming it's going to iterate over time. In terms of the people that I'm trying to bring together, at first it's going to be the people who are actually involved in the work itself. as well as who have inputs into what should be on the roadmap. So who are the people who understand the problem deeply, the customer deeply, the business value? So that can be potentially salespeople who are out there talking to prospective customers in like a B2B environment. Like they're going to have the voice of the customer like front and center. And as a new PM, maybe I haven't like built their roadmap before. I'm going to rely on them for input. Maybe I want research involved as well, because there's going to be things that we need as input for the roadmap. So I want them involved. And I certainly want tech involved throughout the entire process, so that at the time in which we kind of have a better idea of what it is we want to build, I'm not having to convince them at that point why we're going to build it. They're on that journey throughout the entire process. So they kind of both feel a little bit of agency towards what's being worked on, but they also understand the why. And I'm not having to explain it to them once it's kind of already been socialized elsewhere. So they both will feel a bit more ownership of the outcomes because they were part of that whole journey.
Thank
Hope
you.
that answers your question. Okay.
It looks like we've got one more from Ian, if you're still okay with staying with us, James.
I could take one more, but I just got a message from the missus. So my attention is needed, and it's also bedtime.
Okay, yes,
What's
and I'll point out that James is in London, so it's definitely bedtime. The question that Ian had is, any suggestions for
Ian.
managing unrealistic timelines where there is no appetite for limiting scope?
Yeah. So classic prioritization problem. You have to force those discussions. And this is, again, so managing unrealistic timelines where there's no appetite for limiting scope. There needs to be a trade-off, right? The game of product management is trade-offs. And so either there's implicit trade-offs or there's explicit trade-offs. Explicit trade-off would be like, some of these features aren't going to launch when you want them to with this timeline and these resources. That's like an explicit trade-off. An implicit trade-off is teams like overexert themselves to try to make it all happen. And guess what happens as a result? Product quality suffers. Things get missed. Bugs, happen. Tech debt like scales out of control. And now you've launched this thing, and now you got a bunch of problems that you have to fix. Or worst case, you like erode trust with customers because a leader didn't find it acceptable to be okay with a trade-off. And so part of this is like, who is the person that you need to get on board with a trade-off, and try to understand like what their motivations are, what things would cause them pain. Say like, hey, here's a problem we're concerned about happening as a result, unless we make this trade-off. And ideally that problem you're surfacing up to them is one that they care deeply about, which is like, hey, if your main goal is revenue, and I see that there's a potential we're going to miss revenue if this messes up, like I'm going to anchor that discussion with that leader on like impact to revenue as one way of kind of trying to negotiate with them.
Awesome. James, thank you tons for joining us, for spending well over an hour with us. For those of you who weren't on before, James joined 15 minutes before we started as well. Thank you tons. It's been really insightful, and we're most appreciative. We have a recording. James, I presume you're okay with our posting that.
My pleasure. And when you do, please send me a link. Be happy to also give you my YouTube handle, and trying to build my own channel now. So more examples of things that I've done online is great for me. So thank you. And yeah, I'd love that. Great. And so we will post it. We put the our URL for our channel in the chat. And I hopefully it's on the Enterprise Agile Global Community Meetup page as well. I've subscribed. I think we put that there. And thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
You want to talk
Thanks,
about
James.
Ron?
What's
the
that?
presentation coming up?
The presentation coming up. Would that be me?
That's you. You want? Yeah, I can.
We're gonna Yeah, we're going to talk about managers. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about leadership on teams, and a very, very, very changed role for managers that Agile provides.
If you guys don't know, Ron has written a book, and
That would be that one.
it's the
That
book.
would be my
Yeah,
fifth book, but that's called
yeah,
Managing the Unmanageable.
Managing the Unmanageable, and it has been translated to multiple languages. There is multiple editions of the book, so he's going to distill the nuggets of knowledge for us in November.
And looking forward to it.
Yeah, join us
Right.
again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.